One of the hardest pills to swallow when you first get started in a health and fitness journey, or this also applies to other things like a business journey or sobriety journey, is that we need to make temporary trade offs. Now, the idea of making healthy substitutions or picking better alternatives is widely discussed inside health and fitness. And even the concept of delayed gratification is something that comes up a lot, right? We have to basically delay the ability to reap the reward versus maybe making a choice that seems superior in a given moment. Now, the problem with doing that repeatedly over time, and when we cave to temptation or cravings or skipping out on the gym, is that we have to pay the consequences for that. Eventually, there is a price to pay when it comes to our health. And one of the most powerful stories or examples I've heard in terms of someone making the decision to finally get healthy was around the idea of actually being at their daughter's wedding. So this is a guy, he's 100 pounds overweight, moving towards cardiovascular disease. And if he does not get his life in order, he's very likely looking at a heart attack or some sort of serious cardiovascular complication before ever being able to walk his daughter down the aisle. Now, preparing meals at home, going to the gym, those might be temporary trade-offs, but it's probably better than dealing with the permanent sacrifice of never being able to see his daughter on her wedding day. And so the concept of delayed gratification and the idea of making healthier substitutions or alternatives is talked about in health and fitness, but I don't always see a sense of urgency around people jumping to make those trade-offs because they may not have fully understood or grasped the idea of this permanent consequence or the permanent sacrifice that may happen. And it doesn't always necessarily need to be a conversation around mortality or death risk from chronic illness, but there may be permanent sacrifice in terms of not being healthy from a musculoskeletal or orthopedic perspective, maybe because you're 10, 20, 30 pounds overweight. It's something that impacts your daily movement and ability to be active with your kids and play outside and be involved in their sports. It's not always necessarily a life or death conversation. I think there are elements of this where if we don't engage in any type of health and fitness, that eventually it will become that conversation. But even in the short term, the sacrifice could be something serious, even if it's not related to chronic illness. It could be pain or discomfort and ability to engage in activities that you love. It could be a sacrifice in terms of potentially a relationship. If we're not able to get our affairs in order when it comes to healthy habits and fitness, and there's other aspects of this as well. Maybe it's a professional sacrifice that's made because you're not willing to make a trade-off of temporary entertainment or scrolling your social media feed versus fully engaging in your own personal and professional development. The key premise is that short-term trade-offs can lead to long-term benefits. The problem is that the short-term trade-off doesn't always seem like the sexy option in the moment. It's not always necessarily this really enticing alternative. It might be a substitute. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be in pain to do it, right? So cooking a meal at home doesn't necessarily mean you're being tortured. It's something that may require a little bit of effort to actually do, and you have to maybe get some groceries from the grocery store, but it's not always this super awful thing. It's just kind of an inconvenience. And so when we look at the fact that a lot of these little tiny inconveniences, if we're actually just willing to do them in the short term, that trade-off can help prevent that permanent regret over the long haul because we've actually made somewhat of a tiny difficult decision, right? Versus this really big difficult decision or consequence that we have to deal with when that stacks over time. So if we're able to look at this from the perspective of the price of admission is a few small trade-offs each and every day, but if I'm willing to do those tiny trade-offs and I do it repeatedly, I'm actually far more likely to be successful than the person who's not doing those tiny little trade-offs, and really what they amount to be are substitutions or alternatives. That person is on a slippery slope when it comes to their health, or maybe this is even the example of you care about your business or your company and you're not willing to reinvest or reallocate resources, time, energy, or money towards something worthwhile that would actually save you time and money over the long haul or make you money or buy back your time over the long haul as well. So we constantly have to be evaluating these things in terms of, is this a trade-off that I can make now that may actually pay dividends later? Is this something that by doing something that seems a little inconvenient right now or seems a little bit frustrating, there's a little bit of friction and resistance here, but by embracing that friction and resistance, I can actually have an easier life over the long haul. And this is why you'll hear people in the personal development space or professional development space talk about the idea of intentionally doing difficult things or doing hard things. Now, whether that's working out or a cold shower or doing something else that's hard that you don't necessarily want to do. Meditation can be hard for some people, right? Even though it's a stress management activity, even though it's something that's incredibly good for your nervous system, your brain, and your overall psyche, it doesn't always mean that meditating is like the convenient, fun thing to do in the moment. So this idea of hard sometimes gets thrown around in terms of people doing difficult or challenging things, but sometimes challenging things don't always require physical exertion or any type of punishment. And I think that gets lost in our conversation. So then you have people who are the typical kind of drill sergeant style fitness professional. And then you have people who tend to be maybe a little more sensitive than that. And they don't understand how maybe choosing a slightly more difficult path makes their life easier in the long haul. So this doesn't require necessarily being sadistic or punishing yourself. It just means that sometimes there's going to be friction and resistance in making a choice, but by making that choice, that temporary trade-off is going to prevent you from having to deal with a much greater consequence long-term, whether it's in terms of your health, your relationships, your business, or otherwise. And what needs to be said is in many cases, these decisions, even though they're not the easy decision, they're usually the obvious decision. So when you go to the restaurant, there's things that we probably know are going to be a healthier option on the menu. There's so much information out there about making better choices with nutrition. Usually information's not the problem. It becomes pretty obvious that there are certain things that we can eat that would be more in alignment with our goals, or, the decision to go get that workout in the afternoon, even though, you're tired and you've been busy with work all day. That's not necessarily an easy decision, but it is a pretty obvious decision that one is going to move you closer to your goals versus not going to the gym or not ordering the healthier option at the restaurant. Or if the option is between ordering something enticing on your phone versus preparing a meal with the healthy groceries that you bought earlier that week, we probably know that preparing the meal at home with the groceries that we already bought is going to be the better option. If you ask 10 people, 9 out of 10 people are going to be able to give you that answer pretty confidently. Maybe the other person just needs a little bit more education when it comes to health, fitness, and nutrition. And that's totally fine. But we have more information at our fingertips than ever before, thanks to technology, smartphones, computers, AI, et cetera. So information isn't necessarily always the problem. It's that there's some friction and resistance in making the choice with the information we have. It's not always going to be easy, but in many cases it is obvious. So if we actually get to a place where we're aggressively making these trade-offs, or we're looking for opportunities to make the trade-offs, knowing that that deal, that little barter that you just made, is an opportunity to get closer to the future version of yourself that doesn't have to deal with those sacrifices, that actually gets to reap the benefits, that's pretty powerful. So it's like the small business owner who, instead of going to the party or instead of watching extra Netflix on the weekends, decides to get a few extra hours of work in. And it's the difference between maybe not being able to afford the family vacation versus being able to go exactly where they want, to the exact resort or accommodations that their family's looking for, to be able to go to that exact location and do the exact activities that they want, versus having to be super stressed the entire time that they're going on vacation, right? Because of the idea of paying for that vacation and the fact that maybe they weren't in a place financially to be able to do it. Same thing for health and fitness. There's a lot of times where people don't make the trade-offs in the moment, and they get in a situation where it's like, oh, gotta have my shirt off, or oh, we're going on this trip, or oh, there's a photo. And then the sacrifice becomes very palpable in real time. You can actually feel the fact that I should have made some different decisions previously. We may not always unpack it that way in the moment, but if we're to dig into it, there's a bit of regret, right? Or maybe a lot of regret when we're living in that moment, versus if we were to look back, there's probably a chance that there were countless decisions that were made that led to that point, that culmination of regret, which in the moment were just those tiny trade-offs that I'm talking about. So when we're looking at this, again, a lot of times this is going to apply to a client's health and fitness journey and help them understand that in order to be the person that they want to become and have the body that they want to have, we've got to make some of these temporary trade-offs. They're not necessarily optional. It's part of the price of admission. But the sooner that we're willing to engage in making those trade-offs, and we have some sense of urgency around making those choices, even if they're not always the most convenient ones, the faster we can begin to live that life without regret, or without having to worry about taking that picture or going on that trip or being in a situation where we wish we felt more confident because we had banked all of those previous trade-offs to then show up as a better version of ourselves in the moment. So it's not always fun, but in many cases it is obvious, and it gets a whole lot more fun once you've already started making some of these little trades and little substitutions, because then you have this thing called momentum. And once you've built up that momentum over time, it becomes a lot easier to actually stay in shape and stay healthy, or, stay in a good place, whether it's financially or with your business, because you've already made those trade-offs before. So the longer we procrastinate and put off the trade-offs, the closer we're getting to having to deal with that ultimate price, which is that sacrifice that I mentioned earlier. So whether it's a dad who has 100 pounds to lose because he wants to be present for his daughter's wedding, or whether it's a business owner who needs to make some difficult decisions and make some trade-offs so that they can live the life that they want with their family, or if it's just someone who's starting to get, involved in their health and fitness journey for the first time in many years, we all have to embrace this concept at some level, and different goals may require different trade-offs, right? Being an Olympic athlete requires much greater trade-off than just going to the gym 3 times a week and losing 5 to 10 pounds. But if we can at least wrap our head around the fact that really these trade-offs are more like substitutions or alternatives, to make it a lot easier for us over the long haul, and realize that our effort isn't for nothing, and that if we develop this skill of being able to make those choices, even when they're not necessarily the appealing ones that have the most instant gratification, the more likely we are that we're going to benefit from that delayed gratification over the long haul. And this is especially true of a health and fitness journey. And this is why you see people who have actually, when they've been engaged in health and fitness for a really long time, it becomes a lot easier for them to stay in shape because they've cemented those habits, and they understand this concept of, even when I don't necessarily feel like it, going to the gym, because I know that even if I just go for 30 minutes, that's going to be a lot better than the permanent regret of the fact that I stayed at home. And if I make that decision repeatedly, I'm looking at entirely different outcomes when it comes to my health over the long term. So help your clients understand this. If you're a health and fitness coach, if you are just getting started in your own nutrition or physical fitness journey, it's something that the sooner you can embrace this, the more it's going to feel like you have the wind at your sails versus going uphill, because it becomes kind of this obvious known elephant in the room versus trying to skirt around it and thinking that you're someone who can get away with not having to make those trade-offs, which isn't necessarily true. We all have to deal with it in some form or fashion, whether it's related to our nutrition and meal prepping, or whether it's going to the gym, right? And maybe a trade-off is maybe you're not meal prepping. Maybe you're ordering your meals from a meal prep company, but then there is a little bit of a financial trade-off because you're paying someone else to make your meals. So again, this is where we have alternatives. There's a lot of different ways to work out. There's a lot of different ways to eat healthy, but the principle remains the same. So the sooner we can embrace this, the sooner we can begin to reap the benefits overall. And remember, temporary trade-offs going to be much, much better than that permanent sacrifice or regret from not making that trade-off in the moment. If you're enjoying this episode, be sure to share with a friend, family member, or client who may benefit from this. And if you're on audio, leave a 5-star rating and review. YouTube comments and that thumbs up are super helpful. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes. Kind of thinking about this process of transformation and the mental side of nutrition and fitness. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and appreciate you tuning in as always. I'll talk to you in the next show.